mode.
I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. My name is Bill Baker with Firestorm, and on behalf of Firestorm and the New Jersey Manufacturing Extension Program, we're pleased to have you with us. This is the part of the Crisis Coach webinar series in conjunction and sponsored by the New Jersey MEP. Today we're discussing violence prevention, identifying behaviors of concern. Our presenter today is Jim Satterfield, President of Firestorm, and he'll be with us shortly. We'd like to invite you to become our friend on Facebook, Firestorm Solutions. You can follow us on Twitter, Firestorm Soul. There is a hashtag. That hashtag is Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value and empowers you to manage risk and crises. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We do want to remind you once again, the presentation today is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion. And this work product should be read in conjunction with advice from your organization's personal counsel. In addition, do not interpret this information as legal advice or legal opinion. Firestorm is so pleased to have a long, ongoing relationship with the New Jersey MEP. This is the 8th in the 2016 Crisis Coach webinar series. You can go to firestorm.com and you can watch past webinars in this series for the last 2 or 3 years, and you can also register for future webinars. Our good friend Joe Caratanudo is with us today. Joe, I'm going to turn it over to you for some information about the New Jersey MEP. Joe?
Thanks, Bill. As many of you may already be aware, and some may not, that the New Jersey Manufacturing Extension Program, its mission is really to focus on small, mid-sized manufacturers to help them become more productive, more efficient, more globally competitive. And we do it through a host of different services that we provide. Everything from helping companies with their energy costs or taking advantage of R&D tax credits that are available to them, in addition to process improvement like lean manufacturing and Six Sigma. We also do get involved with companies to help them with certifications like ISO certification, and in addition on the business development end of things, with strategic plans and business development and marketing plans. So it's a pretty broad list of services that can assist manufacturers in almost every segment of their business. And of course, today's segment involves business continuity planning, of which we offer services in conjunction with Firestorm and a free assessment that's available to all manufacturers in the state of New Jersey. And they can access that either through NJMEP.org or through Firestorm. Bill, back to you.
And I'll jump in, Bill. Blair's normally with us at this time, and he is out with a client in a meeting, and I believe they're going to be dialing in toward the rest of our session today. I'm Jim Satterfield. I'll be your presenter today, and we've got a lot of material to cover. Unfortunately, as we look at the news, workplace violence, active shooter is something that is constantly in the news and is certainly an issue that brings a great deal of interest. And when we think about what keeps you up at night, this clearly is one that businesses are having to face and be concerned about what they will do to address those types of exposures. But one of the things that I'd like you to stop and think about, is it a problem? And we did a survey, and here are the results that you'll see, and you'll see that half of the responders do not have a program in place to identify behaviors of concern before they escalate to violence. And today's discussion is going to be looking at this subject from that perspective. How do we identify these behaviors of concern before they become violence within our organization? Now, we can think about all the things that we've seen, whether it was the shootings in California or the club in Orlando. Is this workplace violence? Is it terrorism? Does it matter? The end result is we see far too many pictures like the one on the screen now. Could we have prevented that? Could it have been recognized, and could it have been seen? And one of the things that we're going to focus on today is how that process would work and what you might want to think about in your business. When we think about workplace violence, it's almost every incident is preceded by warning signs, indicators. These behaviors are going to be the ones that we want to point to in order to be able to control what's occurring. Now, if you look at the screen here, you can see the individual clearly on the screen who's about to create violence. Well, actually, I can't. It looks like all those dots look pretty similar to me. It wouldn't be easy for me to pick out that one person. But if something were to change, if suddenly I started to see a warning sign, now there emerges a small red dot. And you know what? I can see that dot on the screen and I can locate it. So when we think about this and we think about behaviors of concern, warning signs, those are the things that we're looking to help us identify that red dot before it disappears and we come back. Now, I think I'll bring the dot back for a minute, because what happens is that behavior of concern starts out very small, but through other factors that happen to that individual, the pressure starts to escalate and it starts to expand, and then suddenly it explodes outward. And that's where the violent act occurs. So when we talk today about workplace violence and we talk about behaviors of concern, our goal is to intervene before what you see on the screen occurs, before that violence gets out of control and starts to have an impact. Now, when we talk to people after a disaster or a crisis, and as you know, Firestorm does crisis management, and all of our planning is based upon our experiences and what we have found in these types of events. And all those quotes that are there, you start to see that people had an idea that something was wrong, and they should have been able to intervene in that particular organization, but in fact that they didn't. So when we think about it, if we could stop just one act of violence, a death or a suicide, would it be worth it? Having done the crisis management support years ago at Virginia Tech, Dr. Charles Steger, the president, had to make 32 phone calls home to tell someone that their loved one wouldn't be coming back that night. But let's look and see if we can see a pattern start to develop here that we can identify. Let's take an employee, and we're going to call this guy Fred. By the way, that was Mr. Rogers, if you remembered. Welcome to my neighborhood, Mr. Rogers, was Fred Rogers. So we're going to call him Fred today. And he gets a poor performance review, not happy. He gets in an argument with security. A coworker reports that Fred had some additional issues, and he told him that you guys will be sorry. Fred's absenteeism rate starts to increase. A friend of Fred's hears him talking crazy, but doesn't really want to get involved. Fred's posts that he's tired of being treated like a dog and is going to make them sorry tomorrow. So who's in charge? Who's responsible? Which one of these people should have come forward? Why can't they see that something's about to happen with Fred here? And the reason is all the information is siloed and it's in disparate systems. We need to get this key information known, because if it is known, we start to see that there were more dots that were out there. And then we start to try to figure out how can we connect these dots. And as we connect the dots and understand them in its totality, we see, wait a minute, it looks like there's a gun starting to emerge here. So the key in identifying and preventing violence is identifying these behaviors of concern and tying them all together so that you can see the pattern and the impact that it's going to make. We remember the Connect the Dots books and pads that you got when you were a child as a way for entertainment in that process. But that's exactly what we're doing here. We're trying to find how do we connect all of these dots to make sure that we can identify those behaviors of concern. So, well, who commits workplace violence? Well, it's our coworkers, managers, supervisors, former employees who come back, who have a sense of they need to even a score, strangers that come into it, customers and clients. So what we need to do is continually focus on those individuals and those behaviors. So how do we reduce this violence? You've got to create a culture where everyone's treated fairly. You've got to make sure that your policies are up to date. We regularly review policies in organizations and find out they don't have them. We got a call yesterday about an organization where someone brought a gun into the office and was showing it, and the gun discharged and an individual was shot, and it was serious. When you look at this, policies that you have to control those types of things, everyone in the organization has to look and identify these warning signs, because if they don't, then you're going to find yourself being surprised. So we need to then look at behavioral risk and threat and start to do these assessments. Yes, you need to have physical security. We're in the process of looking at a large manufacturer and going to each of their locations, increasing the physical security, which in thinking of that is access and awareness, keeping people out, making sure that you know what's going on, the intelligence network, recognizing those behaviors. We're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. And finally, response protocols. But the goal isn't to try to figure out what am I going to do with the guy standing in the door with a gun. It's what can I do to keep the man from being at the door with a gun. So as we think about workplace violence and look at the lessons that we've learned from all of these shootings, there are a bunch of things that come to the surface, and let's talk about what those are right now. There are always going to be warning signs. There are always going to be warning signs. That's the thing that we want to start to concentrate on. When people plan targeted violence, they tell somebody. The statistics are fairly significant here. 80% of the time, if an individual has hostile intent, they've told somebody else. And 67%, they've told 2 or more people. And when people know, what do? They talk. Where do they talk? They talk on social media. So there's an opportunity there for you to uncover that there's something going on within your organization that you need to stop and address. The aspects of these types of things, that grudges are there, they have communicated with others about people that they're upset with, and we know that the reason why this comes to all of us as a surprise is people are reluctant to come forward. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to be seen negatively. So we're going to have to increase and give a channel for people to report anonymously. We can't wait, again, until that gun comes to work. As we think about it, people just don't snap. They're not going to be, okay, now I've had it, this is it, boom. It's a pattern that builds. It's a building process. This happens to me, that happens to me, the other happens to me. And now as a result of that, I draw the analogy back to the old Popeye the Sailor cartoons. You know, I've had all I can stands, I can't stands no more. And Popeye would open the can of spinach and chug-a-lug it down and then proceed to take action. So these behaviors are very important to observe and intercede before they happen. When that egg falls off that table, it's not going to be a pretty sight to try to pick it up and put those pieces back. But seeing it sooner, being able to pull it back onto the table, being able to deal with those behaviors, to eliminate those concerns is really where we're focused. Now, in every case, it's not always going to be easy to see. Threats are much clearer. You should assume that any threat is actionable. And so you want to see, do they have the capability? Is it targeted? Is it specific? All of those elevate us in the various types of threats. And in our previous monthly conversations, we've talked about that element here. So a threat is going to stand out from everything else. It's certainly something that means it's on a more urgent pattern. But in many cases, those things won't be that recognizable. What kind of threatening behavior is clear? Well, somebody's bullying. Yes, we have bullying in the workplace. There are 2 million episodes of bullying in our schools annually. By the way, there are 2 million episodes of workplace violence in our companies annually. You see the correlation there? Where do those kids go? They graduate and go into the workforce, and then you have them in your company, in your organization. Cyberbullying means that you never get away from it. It's there. We actually have violence. Early on in one of the Firestorm engagements, we arrived at a location and we were meeting at this particular one with the safety committee, and the safety committee got out into a fight. The ludicrousness of that is just hard to imagine. What were they doing? Stalking. We've seen domestic violence coming into the workplace, date violence, threats, verbal and physical, weapons at work. The example I gave about yesterday, the man going out to his car, getting the gun and bringing it back in. So threatening behavior jumps out at us more so than those others. But what about the behaviors of concern? Some of those are clear. People talking about suicide. And obviously we all know that suicide is never a joke. It should be treated as serious and actionable. And what we also find is those individuals who are contemplating suicide generally have a kill list. I'm going to take these people out and even the score, and then it's death by cop, or I'll commit suicide at that point in time. So as you start to see any conversation about suicide, your alarm meter needs to raise up. Talking about getting a weapon, if somebody who doesn't have one, that they would do. Intimidating comments, say, I'm going to hurt him. More so than just kidding, I could kill him, is just a comment you might say, if he does that again, I'm going to pop him upside the head. We're not talking about that. So you'll see a blog out shortly from Firestorm talking about context and understanding when words are said and what they mean at that point in time. Any physical destruction to property, fits of rage, somebody who is consistently responding back to every comment on the internet, sending pictures, pushing those down, blaming others for things that are happening in that, files, complaints, and grievances. Look at the grievance reports that you are having to deal with in loners, some obsessions with military, police, criminals. We had an employee who went into a location starting saying, I could put a sniper up over here and one up over there and control the main production floor, and we can figure it out. Those are potential behaviors of concern. But many of them aren't as clear as what we're talking about here. And fascination with weapons may or may not be a concern. Depression, substance abuse. Certainly these put us on paths of it. Any abuse at home, either as an abuser or someone who is abused. What we really are looking in all of these areas is the bullet that comes up next. It's the delta. It's the change in behavior. Someone who was normally on time, someone who was normally a team player, who starts to be late, who becomes argumentative. They become inflexible, paranoid. They take criticism poorly. Anything else that makes you worried or not sure about what to do about a peer. Those things may not be as immediately clear, but we have to be focused, and the change word on that page is probably your best indicator. So who poses the highest risk? It's accumulation of things that are happening in someone's life. They've had multiple losses, maybe a divorce, a foreclosure, a bankruptcy, a loss of a parent, suicide, idle thoughts, specific threats. They're continually the butt of jokes within your organization. They're coming to work, obviously under the influence of drugs or alcohol. They had a process going in the grievance area. They pull out because they're looking to try to settle this some other way. All of those would come back, and you could talk about anything that's this mood swing. Remember, again, the change that we're focused on. What are some of the protective factors? Why does everybody not spin off? Well, they have support systems. They have family attachments, personal attachments that would help. Interest outside of your place of work or school. They actually respect authorities. They have some coping skills to deal with it, and they take responsibilities for their actions. So these mitigate that switch from just being a behavior of concern up to becoming a violent act. So what leads to violence? And now we're giving you the list that you'd look at. And while we talk about the others, these are the things where the problems could, in fact, come into play to make a difference. Their support systems are breaking down. There are worst-place factors there. Maybe they didn't get that promotion. Maybe they have a conflict. Maybe they were denied overtime. They got a change in route or a change in responsibility. This constant paranoia about their cameras here. I have to swipe my card when I come into work. The personal factors, and substance abuse is a role there. We pull all of that together to create a behavioral snapshot when we think about these types of individuals. Now, we pulled it all together here, and you'll notice that we look at psychological, biological, social, peer factors, threat-related behavior, workplace, and family. So as we think about each of those elements, there are factors underneath it, or the signs or the behaviors of concern, and they're listed on the site here as you look at each of those. And there are the protective factors down in the bottom left-hand corner. So no single list, no one item is going to be to say, this is the one that's going to happen. And we use the term snapshot because it's where are they today? Where are they next week? Where are they the week after that? And we're looking at this behavior over time in order to be able to address these concerns and have a better sense of control associated with it. So as you think about your organization, who has this responsibility to deal with it, and where do they come into play? Now, as we think about this, it helps us to be able to do this type of screening to understand what's going on within the organization. Now, this picture was designed to think about a ball. We took a red rubber ball and we threw it down and it started to bounce. You couldn't tell, is this on the way up or is it on the way down? And that's where you look at the screening process and measure over time what's going on to know what is needed at this point in time. Because this snapshot is just a single picture in time. Someone in your organization needs to be focused on that, and that will come through, as we'll talk about today, a threat management team within your organization. And we'll spell out some of how that will be structured in a few minutes to give you an idea of how you go about creating a workplace violence program within your organization. So when we think about behavioral risk and threat assessment, that's a program. Firestorm uses the acronym BERTHA, Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment. It's made up of 4 components. First is an awareness training. We got to train everybody what to look for. You've got to create an environment where if you see something, you say something, and the majority of times those environments fail because all those comments you saw on an earlier slide, I knew something was wrong, I wasn't quite comfortable with that particular individual, now they didn't come forward and say something. You need an intelligence network. One is the ability to have anonymous reporting to get that information coming into your organization. You have to monitor social media. If you don't have an intelligence program to monitor what's going on, you won't know about those particular events. We set up a geofence around a distribution center. I found an employee there who made 80 posts in one 8-hour shift. And he started talking about he was having problems with his boss, and they were racial, and his last posting of the day was there's only one way to resolve this. I'm going to bring a gun to work tomorrow, and we're going to settle this once and for all. You've got to have standard reporting methods, and as we've seen a change, and we'll mention this in another slide in a couple of minutes, as our young force shifts over to Gen X, your anonymous reporting needs to be text-oriented. It's not enough to have a phone line or the old suggestion box. New requirements are to engage the workforce. You do pre-screening and background checks before you hire. That has to obviously be done at the county level. If you're looking at national criminal databases, they're going to report felony convictions. But if I was to arrested for a felony and plea bargain down to a misdemeanor, it would not appear in a national background check. That's only at your county level. So you want to look at it and look at what your key metrics are. What are you looking to establish in this area? The intelligence network is, you want to know about that before they attack, and all the statistics that we've given you earlier. And we have shared some of the elements on this slide with you, but the fact is people know and they talk, and if you listen, you're going to find that information out. Anonymous reporting is to report behaviors of concern, and the key phrase there is anonymously. The tool we use is called Tip Now, and it is the ability to get that tip in and have it understood and go ultimately into a central repository to combine. The tipster sends it by text or mail, it comes in, it's reviewed, and it's the ability to communicate back and forth. By the way, there's another advantage of text anonymous reporting. You could be looking at the person with a problem and typing with your thumbs, and they're unaware that you're reporting that behavior of concern at that point in time. A central repository, that's where all the tips are logged into a single place. What we find is a supervisor sees something, someone in another department, a worker, a tip comes in, but there's not a central place where all of those are brought together so that you can see the pattern, just like the gun we showed you earlier on the connect the dots. But having a central repository makes a significant difference. And then Bertha, having a plan that will help you deal with those to find out what's going to happen, to have that report coming in to each of those locations, to be able to sign off of it, and have this threat management team to review those submissions and be able to have a process to evaluate them in coming into play. So that Bertha plan takes the tip of the report, and an initial risk categorization is done. And we think of this in terms of low, medium, or high. You're trying to say, is there really some threat here? And we actually take that low, medium, and high to say, is this something that's routine, something we would just handle with our normal discipline at work, or is this something that is urgent? We've got to call 911. This person is immediately threatening with a gun. We've got to take those actions. It's that middle one that becomes the area where the threat management team begins the screening. That middle area, the term would be investigate, becomes there. Now, in that investigation process, we're going to step you through how you would divide that again into 3 different buckets to have that process established of what are you going to do next. And that's where we start to come together. Now, the next slide is very busy. It lays out this type of a workplace violence prevention program, the behavioral risk threat assessment, with a framework and a plan. And here's the overall framework. On the left, as we've talked about, you've got to have awareness. You've got to see what's going on and have people looking for those warning signs. And then the intelligence network is the anonymous reporting, how you monitor social media, call center, the staff, all of the elements that are associated with it. And then as it moves through under the plan, that initial categorization, the threat management team actions, which lead to the investigation and behavioral risk screening, then the monitoring and their case management. I'll split that decision in the next slide, and we'll talk for a minute or two about that. And then finally, there's the sign-off and record keeping. We want to follow that employee to see what needs to occur. Now, obviously, we have to look at our HR policies and procedures, our emergency response protocols and plans, our security assessment, what are we doing in each of those elements. But the key focus here is on these behaviors of concern. Because at this point, I don't have an injury to an employee. At this point, I don't have a man standing there with a gun. I don't have individuals that have lost their life. Our goal is not to focus on, all right, we're going to go into lockdown, we're going to run, hide, fight, we're going to wait for the police to come in a diamond formation and take this individual out. The key is finding that potential, the person that's on that path to violence, and intervening and de-escalating before it occurs. Now, it's not enough in today's world simply to fire someone. Hey, I'm going to fire them and get them out of here. We don't want to deal with it. They'll come back. And repeatedly, we find individuals who come back to their workplace to take vengeance, to settle the score, to right that wrong. Terminations, in many cases, will result in those types of actions coming back and having a direct impact. So if we're thinking about looking at these behaviors of concern and this threat management team, what are they focused on? And they're focused on trying to really understand, is it at a guarded risk level? That means it's only a little bit above our normal discipline. We're going to try to follow it and see what we need to do. Is it elevated? Well, now we probably need to have some concerns that violence can't be ruled out, maybe have the intervention of a threat of violence professional to do that assessment. It's a severe level. If we're going to have this person suspended and we won't let them come back until we have a release from a forensic psychologist or a psychiatrist that they're not at risk to themselves or others, we'll have specific re-entry processes in place to allow that individual to come back into the workplace because we want to monitor because the risks are too great. Or we've done the screening and wait a minute, this thing could explode right now. We need to have these actions taken. We can't afford not to take the actions that we're focused on. So this is what the threat management team does. Yes, you can take laymen and teach them to be able to do this. Now, they're not doing a threat assessment. When we start using terms like threat assessment, we're more into a clinical environment. But the guarded and elevated, those types of assessments, and that screening is clearly one that you can teach and train within it as they understand this is how you do the investigation, this is how I do the interviews with the employee, with the coworkers, the supervisor in those areas. These are the types of questions that I ask in the interview with this individual that's showing these behaviors of concern. And then if there's additional help needed, then you can bring in those threat of violence professionals to help you opine, because that decision becomes very, very critical. These are the things that help you intervene before this is escalated all the way to a violent act. So in today's world, it's not enough to sit, well, we'll deal with that when the gun walks through the door. If we're dealing at that time, the outcomes for our people will not be positive. We will not have the type of a work area that we want to do. By the way, recognizing these behaviors of concern will also help us in reducing employee turnover. No one wants to work in an environment where they feel threatened by others. You also will reduce the turnover as a result of a violent act. Anytime that there's an act of violence in the workplace, there's significant turnover at that location. So this actually will help you in controlling. In a retail environment, their turnover is well over 2/3 of the employees leave and don't come back. They can find similar jobs elsewhere. They don't want to be associated with that particular location. So what do you need to do? Excuse me. What are our recommendations? First, you've got to take action. You've got to stop and say, look, there are these things here. We need to put a plan in place. It's not sufficient for us to hope that we're not going to have. Focusing on behaviors of concern now instead of focusing on acts of violence later position you to have an intervention before there has been damage and threat within your organization. You have to now look at putting in an anonymous reporting. And it's more than a line where someone just calls and says, hey, I think we've got a safety issue here. It's really the ability to make it truly anonymous, and text is going to become increasingly critical for you there. Having this threat assessment capability, the awareness of it, the ability to manage those threats of that you see in the workplace, and having a systematic process that you go through and deal with each of those. All your people need to be aware and involved, and all of that takes training. There are insurance products, interestingly, and you're seeing us increasingly reminding you to think about insurance. There is insurance related to deadly weapons or sexual molestation that occurs. Those are additional coverages over the ones that you would normally carry. But that gives you access to some resources as well as some financial support as a result of it. You need to have an intelligence network. The day and age that you could just wait and see what happens and learn about it and react in the few seconds before an event occurs, those days are gone. You know that these threats are out there. You can see them on social media, and if you don't have an intelligence network, you are then going to be that much more behind. By the way, the good news is this is inexpensive. It's a few $100 a month to have that type of a system in place. We had an account that has hundreds of restaurants on their company Facebook account. An anonymous post occurred that an individual was going to go to a particular restaurant on Friday and kill everyone. The post came in on Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock. They called, and we started doing research around it, and were able first to figure out the first name of the individual, to figure out their girlfriend's name, their last name, and the home address. Turns out this was a 17-year-old boy who'd been working in the restaurant and was fired, and decided that he'd go back on Friday and even the score. The police went to the home, talked to the boy and the parents, and the issue was diffused before it got there. By the way, in the process, we set up a geofence around the restaurant to monitor social media communications in and out from that particular site, and were able to uncover that the manager at that particular property was selling drugs out the back door. So it was a 2-for-1. You've got the person who wanted to kill everyone, and in addition to the drug deal that were going on. And we recommend that you get support. Think about this now. Think about who your internal and external resources are that will help you take advantage to be able to deal with these behaviors of concern before they escalate into the violent act. If that young man, the 17-year-old, had been walking into the restaurant with a weapon, we would have been a completely different outcome for everyone that was at the restaurant that day, and the image and brand and reputation of that restaurant for years to come. So as you think about it, this is where the world has evolved to, and it needs to be a part of your organization. So what can you do? We'll start now with some awareness and prevention training. Establish the intelligence network. Develop your own workplace violence program. If you need assistance, we certainly are glad to help. You want to have your emergency response protocols in place. We're not saying that that's not important, but that's a standard approach that you can have to make sure that you're ready to know what to do if, in fact, this does escalate to violence. There are assistance. We have a program at Firestorm called Crisis Stop. If you'd like to be a part of that, there is no cost. And what you would be able to do is to call upon us in a crisis, and we would help you in the first hour at no additional cost. I would recommend that you look at deadly weapon or active shooter insurance that's available now. Look at your current response plans. All of those should be working intertwined together. And stress test your plan. What would you do if you observed this behavior? What would your people do? How would they report it? What actions would they need to take in putting that into place? Now, you can download a brief on today's webinar at firestorm.com. It will be up shortly, and that would outline a lot of the material we've covered here and give you some of the reference slides that we discussed today. So as you think about that, this is part of the continuing education as we look at how can we improve all of our programs in all of our organizations to align to best practices, and that's the key. Our thanks to the New Jersey MEP for underwriting this webinar series and promoting it there. I believe Joe had another commitment that he had to rush to help and wouldn't be available to provide any insight. I will tell you that the New Jersey MEP, for those of you that are calling today and joining us from New Jersey, does provide programs that will help and support you in your plans. So we would like to thank the New Jersey MEP for underwriting this series. If you've got questions about what you're seeing here, I would recommend that you go to Firestorm.com. There's a wealth of information there with briefs, materials, recordings of other webinars. There's an opportunity. You can ask questions there, and we'll be back in touch with you. You can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com, or you can pick up and call us at 800-321-2219. Several years ago, we got a phone call from a utility. They were in the Midwest, and the gentleman was calling was saying, we've got an employee who said they're going to come and kill everybody at headquarters. And my first reaction was, why are you calling us? And he said, well, I attend your webinars, and I knew if we had a problem, we needed to talk. As we talked through it, he'd already called the police to help at the headquarters area. But it turned out that this employee had been on disability. The insurance company had denied the disability, and then the only thing he felt he could do is to go back and even score. And so he called in and was getting money literally out of his 401k to buy a weapon to go back to the headquarters location and kill everyone. So as we talked about it, we then started saying, well, does he work at headquarters? No, he works at another location. Have we put security there? No, we haven't. So we started to do that. And then we started to say, well, why was he denied disability? Well, that was up to the insurance company and not them. And I said, well, why don't we reach out and help in that process, look at potentially unemployment and other actions. There was a threat, which is certainly worse than just a behavior. It was at that point. He had a weapon, he had the ability, he had a target, it was actionable. Intervening now, before that man went to work with a gun and started shooting is the goal. Or it would have been another story on the 5 o'clock news. Glad to let you know that intervention occurred, but there were patterns there. This individual had domestic violence, had restraining orders against them. There were constant warning signs of behaviors of concern well before it got down to this point. You can make a difference. No one here wants to pick up the phone and call an employee's family or anyone to say, I'm sorry, your loved one won't be coming home from work today. That's behaviors of concern. That's where our world is today, and it's a challenge that faces every company. If you'd like to know more about any of these things, reach out to us. We'll try to reach out to you. And if you're interested in doing it, we have a special program that we're doing in conjunction with the New Jersey MEP that we'll help you build a behavioral risk threat assessment program within your company and give you the license for that program for the first year at no cost. If you kept the program in year 2, of course there would be a fee. Think about that. Think about what you've heard today, and think about who in your organization is exhibiting behaviors of concern. Thank you for what you do every day in your job. You do make a difference. We appreciate that. Until next month, Jim Satterfield, Firestorm. Have a great day, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you, Jim. Bye.